Olá, eu sou Catiúcia Sotomayor e este é o Agroamérica, programa em parceria com o Instituto Interamericano de Cooperação para a Agricultura, o ICA, aqui no AgroMais, seu canal voltado para o agronegócio 24 horas. A proposta é mostrar iniciativas inovadoras e compartilhar boas práticas dos 34 Estados-membros, que podem ser replicadas em todo o mundo na busca pelo desenvolvimento agrícola e pelo bem-estar rural. Hoje o assunto é o investimento em biotecnologia em Trinidad e Tobago, a transformação digital e os desafios da pandemia para o setor do agronegócio. Quem conversa com a gente diretamente de Port of Spain é o ministro da Agricultura, Solo e Pesca, o senador e advogado Clarence Hambarat. Thank you very much for your presence. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Your interest in agriculture developed through your father's career as a forest officer and your family's long history in farming, right?
Yes, for sure. In fact, it dates to over 150 years ago. My great-grandparents came from India as indentured laborers to work on the sugarcane estates in Trinidad and Tobago. There were also laborers who went to Guyana and Suriname and other parts of the Caribbean. But my great-grandparents came to Trinidad and Tobago, started on the sugarcane fields, and since then our family has been in agriculture across Trinidad and Tobago. My father and his siblings all developed careers in agriculture, and many of them worked in the same ministry that I'm responsible for now.
Now, as a Minister of Agriculture, can you tell us how international cooperation works today in Trinidad and Tobago on supporting agricultural and rural development?
International cooperation has always been important to Trinidad and Tobago. We have a long history with the United Nations. We have a long history with FAO, ICA, and some of the other regional and global organizations. Trinidad and Tobago has even had leadership roles in some of these organizations. Caribbean region has had employees in FAO, in ICA, and across the globe. So international cooperation is very important. We look forward to cooperation in particular in relation to technical cooperation. We do not have in the region and in Trinidad and Tobago, we do not have all the skill sets, and we do not have the knowledge and details of some of the experiences that similar countries have had, small island developing states, or even larger countries that grapple, particularly in Latin America, with issues like land tenure, budgeting, prioritizing the spend, the plant varieties, and nutrition, particularly nutrition amongst school students. Brazil serves as an important model for a lot of us in terms of the program of feeding for school children. And a lot of the work in relation to research is supported through international cooperation agreement. Right now, for example, we have an arrangement with Argentina, which has grappled with the issue of locusts in Argentina, and we in Trinidad have found that it's moved from a 14-year cycle to a 7-year cycle to now an annual cycle, and it's something that we've been grappling with.
And you also have a new project, the Virtual Center for Agriculture and Biotechnology. What are the prospects for partnership with ICA, and what do you mean to do with this center?
Well, it's very critical. I had the opportunity as a guest of Director General Manuel Otero in October 2019, and that is where ICA at headquarters launched the current development in terms of the virtual center, the hub that is available to support research and learning and education in agriculture. And having seen that and having determined that we need in Trinidad and Tobago to consolidate our resources, we have research institutions, we have research activities, but we need to avoid the duplication, move out of working in silos, cooperate a lot. And I believe that instead of reinventing the wheel, we could form a partnership with ICA for access to its digital resources and It will allow us to disseminate it to farmers, to students, disseminate it to researchers, and also assist us in overcoming some of the issues we have. For example, the use of technology in agriculture, the use of labor-saving devices and labor-saving techniques on the farm, and the use of planting material to deal with pests and diseases and to improve our resistance to climate change.
And with the pandemic, we can say that you have also the challenge of operating with budget constraints, right?
Yes, well, across the world, governments have had to reprioritize because no government had really budgeted for having to pay for persons who would have been out of work for this extended period, to pay for the additional healthcare costs, to pay, for example, sanitizing across the country in schools and offices and public places, and also the loss of revenue for the Caribbean region, loss of revenue in terms of tourism, but in Trinidad and Tobago, the loss of revenue on account of the reduced demand for energy products and the reduced pricing of energy products on the international market. So we're talking about two things. One, reduction in revenue, which means that you have less to spend, but also reprioritizing of how you spend. So we have area of health, for example, will take additional costs, digitizing and making digital devices available to school children across the country and in schools. That is an additional cost. And also across the country dealing with sanitizing and now the dissemination of the vaccine that is here already in Trinidad. Those things are additional budgetary costs for which all of the other ministries will have to reprioritize what we do. So my approach to it has been consolidation of the resources, trying to make what we spend more effective, and using the expenditure we are making in digital transformation to reduce the time lag from seed to the table and to minimize some of the inefficiencies that we have.
And what about the human building capacity for this changed environment? How are you working on that?
Well, certainly COVID has brought particular challenges. In fact, some processes would have disappeared, some occupations around the world would have disappeared. Some industries, for example, the cruise ship industry, on which agriculture depends heavily, particularly in North America for a market that has slowed down. It is, close to zero, and there will be some time before cruise ships pick back up. So that on the one hand, we would find that persons working in particular areas, say for example, airline staff who would have been working in areas of logistics and service, they would be available to other parts of the country, including agriculture. They'd be available to fill jobs. But we're also looking at the future, and the future of agriculture post-COVID requires us to be more dependent on the technology, trying to reduce the physical interaction, moving paper processes to an online environment, working smarter, being able to reduce our time on the road. So those things require different skill sets. And building capacity means we take some of the what we already have in terms of our staff, and we reorient it, we rebuild capacity, and we also open new areas of employment, particularly in our land administration area, which is essentially a paper-based environment, being able to digitize documents, create electronic files, build new databases, create the portal online for people to interface with what we do, go on the field, collect data, collect records, for example, surveying records, digitize those, make them available online. So we will have some transformation in the jobs that are available, in the skill sets that are required, and the efficiency with which we want to move.
Talking about digital inclusion, then the technology, how are you trying to accelerate this digital transformation, removing these obstacles, and how does it affect the agribusiness?
Well, we have been making that investment since 2015 because it's long been recognized that if you have to do transactions across the ministry, in fact, across the country, a lot of our transactions remain paper-based transactions where people have to actually go into an office to physically access a file or to submit a document and have that document processed in a very manual environment. So we've been making the technology changes. We've been developing the IT backbone, the infrastructure, allowing digital internet access throughout the ministry, having the devices available across the ministry for our employees to use, those on the field, having them use mobile devices, GPS-enabled devices. Of course, the law has to be changed. For example, being able to take payments electronically requires changes in the law and changes in the way in which we manage in terms of accountability. Those things have to be changed, written processes have to be changed, and most importantly, the documents which exist, the historic documents, have to be digitized, have to be created, an electronic file has to be created. So what we've been doing is we've been making additional investments now to take on board additional employees who would help us to accelerate the process, because we recognize that we have to move fast and we have to move to a complete 100% electronic environment in a faster period than we had envisaged. So it requires additional funding to be made available. The government has done that, and additional staff to be brought on in order to execute.
Earlier, you mentioned the climate change. How the Caribbean countries can face their vulnerability as everybody else, as all the countries have to?
Well, our vulnerability remains the issue of tropical storms and hurricanes, which come through the region annually. And it must have been some strange act of fate that last year we did not have a combination of COVID and a tropical storm or hurricane. In fact, we had very interesting weather last year that made production in agriculture excellent. We had a good mix of sunshine and rainfall. We have a very hot season from January to June, and the rain comes in June to the end of December. But we had a good enough mix during the intense COVID period last year in 2020. But hurricanes remain and tropical storms remain the biggest threat to the region. It has to do with the intensity of the rainfall. Everybody who lives here will tell you that the showers are shorter, but the rainfall is excessive in terms of the volume, and rapid rainfall, heavy rainfall in a short space of time. You find that those areas which are prone to flooding in terms of the low-lying areas which the farmers favor, the riverbanks where the farmers favor, those the crops are at risk once there is that type of rainfall. And in terms of the fisheries sector, the changes in the weather patterns have brought periods of difficult periods offshore, where we have bulletins warning the fisher folk that they should not go out because of what is happening, rough seas bulletins, and we have more days now during the year where our fisher folk cannot go out. Of course, climate change and the rising tides also has caused us some coastal erosion, which has affected fisheries infrastructure, and even some of the fisher folk who live on the coastline have been affected. So climate change has brought us a series of issues and accelerated issues which have been in the making for a while, and it requires an investment in infrastructure. It requires reorienting our farmers. It requires moving over a period of time away from the riverbanks, away from the flood-prone areas, into more climate adaptable types of farming, protected farming, where we can be shielded from the pests, the diseases, the rain and the sun during the period of intense heat.
Talking about adaptation then, your country, Trinidad Tobago, is a really beautiful and touristic country. How do you try to work nowadays with the pandemic and with everything that we're living, the tourism with the agribusiness? Is that possible?
Well, we've had no tourists. It's like most of the countries in the region. Trinidad and Tobago, since March 2020, our borders have been closed. So we've not had the influx of tourists. The people who have come in have required permission from the Ministry of National Security to enter, and it's been on a very limited basis. It means that we've lost the revenue from tourism, in particular our carnival, which was at the end of February, a significant period of between Christmas and Carnival when we have a lot of visitors, including cruise ship visitors. We've lost that revenue, and there's a significant spin-off from that carnival period that we've lost, and it also means loss of sales to the farmers, because when you have visitors, you have consumption taking place and you have the demand for agricultural products. However, during the lockdown period, when restaurants were closed for several weeks, people had to buy. Even though we had restrictions from the outset of our restrictions in Trinidad and Tobago, farmers were not restricted. So farmers have been able not only to work on their farms and have input suppliers work also to supply. Our farmers market and municipal markets have remained open, and we have had an uptick, an increase in the demand for fresh fruit and vegetables. We've had increased traffic, more people going to those markets, and those farmers who have been selling have reported steady sales, increased sales, and it's been good for them. The government, through its policy in managing COVID, have made sure that the farmers are not affected. They would have had some effect on a household level in terms of family members and so on, but from the conduct of farming activities and sales, they've not been affected in a significant manner.
So we can say the food security was not affected also, right? It's an important matter.
Yeah, I call it the flow of food. So we depend on imported staples and local fresh fruit and vegetable production. We've not seen significant increases in prices. In fact, our prices have tended to follow the traditional seasonal pricing. So you find in some commodities, you'd find a slight increase over the Christmas period. And in some commodities, as you get into the dry season where we are now, you would find some prices going down. So we've experienced the traditional cyclical movement of the prices, but on account of the COVID, we've not seen that sort of significant increase, which makes things unaffordable. On the supermarket shelves, of course, for imported processed food, there has been some uptick based on pricing globally, availability of supplies, the need for importers to change to new suppliers because of unavailability and because of some countries directing their local manufacturing to remain available for that particular country. We've seen, because we are so heavily dependent on the international growers for grain, for wheat in particular, but corn also for animal feed. And we've seen the increase globally in grain prices, and that has affected us in terms of recent increases. The importers have passed on to the local purchasers, the livestock sector in particular. So we've seen some of those small increases, but we've been able to manage things for the last 10 months of our COVID period.
So could you talk a little bit about the role of CARICOM and other multilateral arrangements to strengthen ties with agricultural countries in Latin America and other regions?
Well, I can say from the outset of COVID, which is about mid-March 2020 for Trinidad and Tobago, both ICA and FAO reached out to me as minister and reached out to the government. And FAO very early on got the Latin American countries to sign on to a declaration where we committed to strengthen our multilateral ties, strengthen cooperation, committed to share data, committed to communicate with each other. And we were able to work together through ICA, for example, was able to assist us. The CARICOM countries, St. Vincent and the Grenadines in particular, rely on Trinidad for its market, for its ground provisions and some other commodities on a weekly basis. They come by vessel, by ship, to Trinidad when we imposed our restrictions on entry to Trinidad and Tobago. It also included those vessels that bring goods from the CARICOM country, but through the intervention and support of ICA, we're able to move the process of clearing those vessels. The paperwork became 100% electronic in the early days of the COVID restrictions. It meant that the vessel could leave St. Vincent and come into Trinidad waters with the assurance of it being able to land, and the crew just simply had to remain on the vessel, and there were persons on the dock who were in position to receive the goods which were brought, and we've had an uninterrupted flow of supplies up through the islands and down from the islands into Trinidad and Tobago. That is an example of ICA getting involved and providing the technical support for us to achieve that. There have been other initiatives involving ICA, for example, Growth Trinbago. Leading into COVID, we've had this interest in Trinidad and Tobago for a resurgence of backyard gardening and home farming and community farming, and we were able to produce 50,000 packages of a combination of 6 different seed types and deliver it to households across the country, and people were very happy. Each package delivered to a household would be able to produce about 40 days supply of vegetables, the critical vegetables, 6 vegetable types, and there's been a significant interest in it in Trinidad and Tobago. ICA worked with the development of the brochures that went with the package. The brochures giving information on how to plant, how to maximize the yield, what sort of pests to expect, and what sort of pesticide regime to use, and even information on nutritional quality of the particular commodity and how it could be prepared. Some cooking tips were given, beautiful brochures, and it was well received by the country, including the parliamentarians. And we are now in the cycle of producing the second set of seeds for distribution under Growth Trinbago. So cooperation with our partners has been very, very important. We've had on the financial side, of course, my colleague in the Ministry of Finance would liaise with the IMF, the World Bank, my colleague in the Ministry of Planning with the IADB, and I have been working with FAO, ICA, and at a CARICOM level, we've just come out of a CARICOM Heads of Government conference last week, chaired by our Prime Minister, the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, who is the current chairman of CARICOM, and part of the 2-day session, the second day, was dedicated to a presentation by the minister with responsibility for agriculture in CARICOM, the lead minister, and that is His Excellency the President of Guyana. And he made a presentation on the prospects for agriculture and particularly the way in which the private sector can contribute to the commercialization in agriculture of the region.
And we can say that family farming is another important aspect of your economy too, right?
Well, as I spoke about that issue of commercialization, the thrust of the CARICOM, of course, is to leverage private sector resources across the region in order to bring in technology, bring in new investment, private capital, and to drive some of the areas that we believe that with private sector investment, we could become more competitive and we could also compete with the imports. But I've always said alongside private sector investment in agriculture, we have to continue to nurture our original investors in agriculture. And our original investors are those farming families that have been here for decades in farming. Like my family, for example, more than 150 years we've been here. We've built our livelihoods on agriculture. Many of my family members have significant investments in land and investments in agriculture. And it is the same across the region and across Latin America. Whatever we do with agriculture, it is going to be built upon those small and medium farmers. Some of them would go on to be large farmers. Some of them would convert their current holdings into limited liability companies. They're going to maybe introduce shareholders. But by and large, at the heart of agriculture in the region and the investment that is made is going to be those families who put food on our table on a weekly basis, the short-term crops, the things that families demand and the things that they find affordable.
Now, what are the expectations for a post-COVID environment?
The reality of post-COVID is that all of us are dealing with reduced resources, reduced revenues, and expenditure demands that we did not budget for leading into 2020. So we must, as an imperative, we must relook what we're currently doing. We must consolidate resources so that we extract greater efficiency from the resources that we have. We can't focus on everything. So if we had 13 or 14 strategic imperatives, we really have to focus on the ones that are going to keep our countries fed, keep our rural communities active in terms of the ability of rural communities to earn a living, particularly women in rural communities to continue to earn a living. We have to be very defensive of that, and we have to focus. The third thing is we have to build that capacity that would take agriculture into the future. Some of what we've been doing before have fallen by the wayside in terms of COVID, and we have to rebuild those resources. And fourth, we have to invest as ministries and as countries. We have to invest in digital technology and in the transformative technology that leads to better use of resources, better service to the client, and greater accountability.
Thank you so much for your time, Ministro da Agricultura, Solo e Pesca de Trinidad e Tobago, Clarence Hammerratt.
Thank you very much.
No Agroamérica de hoje, nós falamos sobre o investimento em biotecnologia em Trinidad e Tobago, a transformação digital e os desafios da pandemia para o setor do agro no país. Você pode rever este programa e também outras entrevistas no nosso canal no YouTube. Aproveite para seguir a gente nas redes sociais, @AgroMaisTV. Continue com a programação do AgroMais, seu canal voltado para o agronegócio 24 horas. Obrigada pela companhia. A gente se vê.